Hello, I'm Recoded Zaphod, and welcome to a tutorial video. I'm going to be showing you how to build this, which is a fuel-efficient auto-smelter. So it's designed to only use fuel when you've got enough items in your furnace to smelt it. I made this recently for my survival Let's Play on the CentralCraft server. So if you saw that, you probably see roughly how this works because I gave a quick overview in that video. If not, you can check that out. But in here, I'm going to give you a block-by-block tutorial of how to build this, as well as explaining how this works. So I designed this initially for kelp. So if I put a bunch of kelp in this top hopper, it's going to slowly filter into this furnace. And when there gets enough items in here, this will activate and it will start smelting because this activates this dropper here, which fires one fuel into the furnace, and that smelts the items which have been put in here. And then once all these items have been smelted, the furnace goes out and that resets the system through this side. So I'm going to walk through what each bit of this system's doing, and then hopefully you'll be able to build it yourself, or if you have a different purpose for something similar that you need, you should be able to adapt it for that as well. So like I said, I designed this for my kelp farm. So I was having kelp coming in, and I was using dried kelp blocks as the fuel. You can adapt this for different types of fuel. So if you're using any types of fuel with different amounts they smelt, some of these larger ones, so the lava bucket and the coal block, smelt more than a stack. So you would actually have to adjust it to count off the hopper above the furnace and then lock a hopper above that. I'll show you how to do that towards the end if you want to adapt it for that purpose. But for the kelp block, which smelts 20, blaze rods, which smelt 12, coal smelts 8, as does charcoal, boats smelt 2, and other wooden things smelt 1.5 in general, at which point it's smelting little enough that this system's probably not what you're wanting to be doing. You just want to run lots in and lots of fuel in, because being efficient with fuel, which is only smelting 1.5 items, isn't really necessary, because it just doesn't smelt that much. Because the idea is you want to avoid putting in your fuel and then having it only smelt one item and then burn out, because the furnace keeps burning lower and lower even if there's nothing left in it to smelt. So if you only have one item go in and you've already got fuel in, the fuel will start cooking, and it'll cook that one item. And then if, say, you've got kelp blocks, it'll then be 19 items worth of time it just smelts nothing, and then it goes out. So yeah, the idea was I didn't want it to be doing that, because then I'd make a loss on the kelp which goes through, so I need to keep it as efficient as possible. So it's sort of designed for farms where you've got your source sort of trickling in. If you're pumping loads and loads and loads in, obviously you're going to want more furnaces than just 1 or 2. So you'll probably want to actually have some sort of super smelter where you put everything in and it smelts it all and then chucks it all out really rapidly with lots and lots of furnaces. So this isn't what this design's specifically geared towards. So yeah, that's worth bearing in mind for what you're doing. So the first thing here is to work out when you've got enough items in your furnace to make it worth putting a fuel block in. So with the kelp blocks, they smelt 20. So I need this to be above 20 items in here when this activates. Now I'm using a comparator because they can read how full a furnace is. If we look over here, for one item, it will activate up to the first notch, and then on 14 to the next, and then 28 to the next. So I want at least 20 in the furnace. I can't get it to match exactly 20 because it switches from here to here when it switches to 28. So as 28 is the first number which is above 20, that's when I'm going to activate it. So if you see, if I put in 22, it activates up to here. But if I put in the extra 6 items and get it up to 28, you can see it activates up to here now. And that's the method I'm using here. So if you're using a different fuel, say blaze rods, they're only 12. So you only actually need it to go from the second one, which is 14, which is bigger than 12. So you can put this repeater one block back and it will work exactly the same if you're using blaze rods in here, or coal. You're going to be wanting to use the second mark as well, because the first one's only 1, so you're not going to want to be using that at any point. So yeah, you can just move this repeater back if you're using less items smelted type of fuel. So here, when it gets up to that point, this one activates, repeater takes that signal and activates this piston, which is a normal piston, and that'll push this redstone block across, which will activate this center bar. So here I'm doing 2 things. The redstone's powering this block, which activates this dropper. So the dropper fires one of the fuel blocks into the furnace, and that starts the smelting process. And also while the redstone block is there, the redstone runs up here and locks the hopper above. And this is so that the comparator over here will go back down, because if you leave this unlocked, it will keep pushing items in if there are more items, and then this will already be on when the system resets, because there'll be more than 28 items in here, and then you'll get this flicking backwards and forth and it'll keep firing fuel in, and that's not what we want. So yeah, it locks that hopper, because applying redstone to a hopper locks it, so it stops pushing items down. So then this smelts, and when it stops smelting, this observer in here notices that, fires this piston, which is a sticky piston, but because it's an observer firing it, it gives a 1-tick pulse, so it spits out its block or pulls it back in, rather than moving with the piston head itself, which activates this observer, which in turn activates this piston, which is a normal piston, which will push this redstone block back. Fortunately, although this gets an update when it starts smelting, there's still 28 items in the furnace, which means this is still on, and this piston is still extended, holding the redstone block in place. So when that side activates, it doesn't deactivate it instantly. So that only actually activates when the furnace goes out, rather than when it first starts. Okay, so now on to the building section of the tutorial. So you're going to put your output chest down the bottom here. So you can see that you can actually extend it sideways if you like, if you want a double chest, or you can feed this into a set of chests if you think this is going to be left for ages. If, say, you've set this up under a farm in the spawn chunks, so it's just going to keep producing and you don't go back to it all that often, then you might want to add hoppers and more chests underneath. But for now, I'm just going to use a single chest, and then you're going to want to put a hopper on top. Hold shift and do that if you're having problems and just opening the chest instead of placing your block. And then above that is going to be the furnace. So this is where everything's sort of focused on. So this is just feeding out the output from the furnace, which it will continue to do whenever there's output to come out. Right, so the next thing to do is to start the back here. It's probably easiest, and I'm going to need some normal blocks. Let's grab some stone brick. So you want a dropper pointed into this furnace. So get that on the hotbar. So you need to make sure it's a dropper, not a dispenser. That's important. And you put it just there, so it's facing into the furnace. So you can see here it's pointed this way, and that's going to be where your fuel goes. So put a stack of dried kelp blocks in there. Right, You can feed into this with hoppers. You might have to go from the side because it's going to have an item repeater on top of it. But yeah, you can use hopper chains to feed the fuel in if you want more than the 9 slots allow. But for now, I'm just going to leave it like this. So I'm going to use the bare minimum, and then I'll show things you can add to it. Right, and then you're going to want to put a block, and just trying to think. Oh, there. Yeah, like that. And then you're going to want a repeater on top of the dropper, and that's going to be facing into a hopper, which is pointed straight down into your furnace. So you look at the side here. Okay, so this repeater is going to be one locking the hopper. And you've got some redstone feeding into this. So this is a redstone which activates both the dropper and locks the hopper. So then you want to be getting a path for your comparator output. So you're going to put your comparator down facing out of the furnace, because that's what it's reading from. And then 3 redstone. Ooh. It's important you get 3, because remember, this is what's counting how many items are in there. Otherwise, it's going to go at the wrong time. And then a repeater. Repeater's not strictly necessary. If you had a piston at this point, it would be fine. But because our piston has to be one further back for the other side to fit, and to fit with how we've built this middle section, the repeater's in there to take this signal and feed it backwards. If for some reason you have to go further back, you can just have this repeater feed into a longer redstone line, but you'd want to read at the same point, unless you're using a different fuel, in which case you'd want to put the repeater in here instead. Right, and then on the side here, you're going to want a normal piston. So shift clicking that again so I don't change repeater timings. And then there's going to be a redstone block in front of this. I'm just going to big block this. Go. So this is a block which shifts over and activates this. So that's the activation side all set up. So now we want the deactivation side. So I'm going to grab a observer. And this needs to be faced into the furnace. So the red dot's pointing away from it. So it's reading when the furnace updates. And then this will feed into a sticky piston, which I don't have. So I'm just going to grab one of those. And the sticky piston needs to be facing backwards. So let's place it from down there. There we go. And then take a normal block. Put that on the end there. And then one block further, you want another observer. So this actually needs to be a gap so that this block can move between that position and this position here. And then I'm going to put a block at the end here. So the observer puts its pulse into this block, which then a normal piston on this side will detect and push a redstone block back. Right, so that's it. That's the entire system for the specific example I've given. And like I said, you can adapt it to different fuels, blaze rods and coal, by moving this repeater back, and you've still got your efficient fuel auto-smelter. However, if you want to do these other fuels, like coal blocks or lava buckets, you're going to have to read off of this hopper up here. So I'm going to show you what the way to adapt it for that. So I'll be back in a moment with a built-up setup. So this is what the altered version looks like if you're using coal blocks or lava buckets. This one's specifically actually for lava buckets. With coal blocks, you actually want to move this repeater one block back, or at least you can, because it only needs 80 rather than the whole 100. Again, this is actually slightly more than 80, and then this is slightly more than 100. But you want the lowest number you can track, which is higher than that. So the idea here is pretty much this whole side's been moved up a block, and then this side, these two are the same height, as is this one here, but then these have to be on the same level as the other side, so they're up a block, and then this middle section's changed slightly. So the idea is to count to 100. You can only actually get a stack of 64 in the furnace, so you're then actually counting off 36 from this top one. I think you actually have to go to 40 something, so at 46 is the number you're actually counting out, because it's the lowest one, which is higher than 36. So at that point, there'll be 110 items between this hopper and the furnace, and that is what will activate the system. Again, this powers the dropper, so it actually goes down into a repeater here to fire the dropper, but it also goes up and locks this hopper here. So the hopper here needs to be coming in from behind, otherwise if it's above, you need this hopper unlocked to keep pushing into the furnace, so it can't be drawing from above, because otherwise it would need to be locked to stop it drawing from above, but it need to be unlocked to allow it to push. So you have to have the hopper behind it here. So this locks at that point, so it stops pushing items into here, but this one is still able to push items into the furnace. So you'll end up with all 100 items getting smelted by your lava bucket, and you end up with 10 left over, but then you'll get your next lot pushed in, because this will reset. So it'll notice, this observer will notice when the furnace stops smelting, and then you'll get this piston push the block either under or grab it away from this observer, which you've got a redstone line on top of, and then this powers this piston to reset system, just like before. So I won't do a block by block for this one, because if you know what's going on in the other one, and you can see here more or less where all the blocks are, so yeah, if you want to do that, that works for that. And if you're using coal blocks, then you want to move this repeater back to here, and let's grab redstone, and then like that, because you don't need to count as high, because it only goes to 80, which is a stack, and then just under 20, but I think the number it counts to is 23. Yeah, 23. So you're actually counting to 87, so you've got a 7 item spare just sitting around. And yeah, so that's the adaptation for lava buckets or coal blocks. With lava buckets, I would strongly recommend having a extra chest or hopper line leading in here, just because they only stack to 1, so you would only have 9 sets in there, and you might as well just have them all feeding in. You could even have a chest just up there, and then have that full, because then that's a lot more. This will probably be quite good for lava buckets, because Verafuel you really do want to be using efficiently. As with coal blocks, you don't want to be wasting 79 smelts if you've only got 1 item in your furnace. Alright, that's going to be all from me for this tutorial. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments. If you've got any feedback, stick that in the comments as well. I've been Recoded Zaphod, and thanks for watching.